Welcome to today's program titled Navigating Federal AI Contracting Requirements in a Shifting Regulatory Landscape, the sixth session of our Winning Combinations webinar series. All participants are in listen-only mode. However, you are encouraged to submit questions throughout the presentation by using the Q&A box on the right-hand side of your screen. For those interested in obtaining CLE credit, a code will be read later in the presentation. Please write this code down as it will not be repeated and is required for the CLE credit request form. During the presentation, you will also see a slide containing a QR code that can be scanned to access and submit your request for CLE credit. You can also find a link to the request form in the connection details email you recently received. Copies of the program's recording and materials will be distributed to all attendees in the days ahead. At this time, I would like to turn it over to Erica Bakes. Erica, you may begin.
Thank you, Sadie. Welcome to our Winning Combinations micro webinar series for government contracts, where we pair Seyfarth's government contracts lawyers with another practice area, and we talk about an issue that intersects both practices. Because your legal issues don't always fall neatly into one practice group, so the content that we provide shouldn't either. For this installment in our series, we're discussing the federal government's shifting contracting requirements for AI. I'm Erica Bakes, a partner in Seyfarth's Government Contracts Group. My practice includes compliance, internal investigations, and bid protests with a focus on national security issues such as classified contract compliance, access to restricted information like CUI and export controlled information, and supply chain security. I'm thrilled to be joined today by Rachel C. from our Labor and Employment Practice Group. Welcome, Rachel.
Thanks, Erica. Happy to be talking about AI, which is my usual beat, which has been my usual beat. My practice here at Seyfarth does focus on AI risk management. And I guess relevant for a good discussion about government contracting, I was in the federal government on the other side, bidding out contracts, awarding contracts, being yelled at by contracting officers about what I could and couldn't do, and you know, getting the crash course in how the government works or doesn't work, and that knowledge seems to be particularly relevant given the moment we find ourselves in.
Yeah, it's been great to have you on as part of our team here, because you've given me such great insight into what the agency is thinking on occasion. So before we get started, I just have a quick programming note. Our next part of this series will be hosted by one of the co-chairs of our practice group, Adam Lasky, and that invitation will be sent out shortly. Okay, so for today's presentation, we've got four main topics. We'll first talk about President Trump and his close advisors have said about AI policy. We'll then talk about Trump's executive orders and AI and what that means for contractors and how that fits into the broader discussion about AI safety and AI security. And then we'll end with some practical contracting considerations. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat and I will relay them to Rachel. All right, so Rachel, let's get started. The Vice President was in the news last week talking about AI. So what are your takeaways from what JD Vance said?
So here's the thing. When we heard President Biden and Vice President Harris talk about AI, there was an emphasis on AI safety and AI security. And in fact, when Vice President Vance was in Paris, it was an international group that used to be called the AI Safety Summit. The first meeting of this group was in Bletchley Park last year, and Vice President Harris, in November, and Vice President was there talking about AI safety, and Vice President Vance came out gunning. He said, I'm not here to talk about AI safety. He wants to talk instead about AI opportunities. I think he really came out gunning for our European allies and the European model of AI regulation, and the things that were discussed at Bletchley Park and the things that Vice President Harris discussed about at Bletchley Park, emphasizing the need for AI safety. And instead, Vice President Vance is talking about the opportunity. Let's go to the next slide, please. So when the Vice President is talking about opportunity. He's criticizing, what he calls excessive regulation of the AI sector that could kill a transformative industry. And what he's setting up here is he's setting up the conflict, the geopolitical conflict that, and let's be clear, it's America first, and that's the rhetoric of the president and vice president. It's not just America first globally, it's America first on AI. And so when he talks about maintaining American leadership, he's setting up the conflict between American leadership on AI and authoritarian alternatives, and that's his words, authoritarian alternatives, which is really a reference to China. So I love this quote for a lot of reasons that you see on the bottom of the slide here from President Trump. It's from the summer of 2024. I think it really shows the way that President Trump thinks about AI. AI is very scary, but we absolutely have to win. Because if we don't win, then China wins, and that's a very bad world. So, I think what we hear from the top, what we hear from President Trump and the vice president emphasizing that is that this is about competition with China, and that excessive regulation is going to make us less competitive with China.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, that's what we've been hearing consistently across the board, not just in AI, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's talk about the his personnel that have been supporting him here. Kind of what are his advisors saying?
Right. So, I think his advisors have not been delivering sweeping AI policy speeches or making, the appearances yet. I think we are very early into the administration here, but the tea leaves that we're reading, I think I first heard this line from President Obama's Office of Presidential Personnel, which is that personnel is policy. And so some of our predictions about the Trump administration in general really rely on looking at their personnel choices, looking at their backgrounds, and looking at what their industry and regulatory and life perspectives are, and what they've emphasized in their past. So we have on my slide here, on my very text dense slide here, some of the top advisors on AI. And so, David Sachs, is at the top, tapped as the crypto and AIs are. My guess is he may focus more on crypto than AI, but they're tied together. And Sachs has, part of the so-called PayPal mafia, like Elon Musk, venture capitalist. He's invested in AI startups, has advocated for minimal regulation, supported a deregulatory approach, and again shares all these views with President Trump that we heard the president and the vice president talk about on economic competitiveness. We have the Office of Science and Technology Policy, OSTP, which is part of the White House, which advises the president on science and technology issues. In the Biden White House, OSTP is the organization that we saw really charging ahead and implementing that Biden executive order. We have Michael Kratsios, again, previously, the CTO under the first Trump administration, really not adverse to regulation, but also very much on the hands-off and sector-specific notions here. And then as a senior policy advisor, really focusing on AI, I think really leading this charge is Srinam Krishnan at OSTP. Again, talking a lot about how we want private sector innovation with less government insight, with a lot of venture capital experience. Okay, got to talk about Elon Musk. I think, interestingly, Elon has been on multiple sides of the AI safety dialogue. I think, he's talked about how, there is an existential risk to AI and signed on to the pause letter that came out a while ago, a year plus ago, saying no, let's pause the development of these cutting edge models, so we can evaluate safety. I think the more cynical among us said, well, let's have OpenAI pause so Elon and xAI and others can catch up. But also, of course, advocating for lighter regulation and doing all the things he's been doing with the Department of Government Efficiency with DOGE, which I think I'll have time to talk about that. Okay, I think
Yeah,
that's
so
all I
as
have to
you
say about that.
Yeah, so as you've said in the past, personnel is policy. So we think this is the direction that Trump's going to go in because these are the people who are surrounding him and advising him. Okay, so let's talk about the executive orders that have come out. And there's been a lot of them, obviously, but we've heard some people say that tactic of releasing so many was to create this shock and awe. But what specifically has happened in the AI sphere?
Right. I think, advising clients about some of the other things that are going on with, President Trump's executive orders. I have really felt that notion of shock and awe. And the media cycle on the executive orders has been, I think absolutely brutal and I believe intentionally so. That's not quite the case on AI, interestingly. So on day one, one of the first that literally after taking the oath of office, President Trump went in the Capitol and immediately signed a few executive orders, and one of them was a blanket revocation of a bunch of President Biden's executive orders, and one of the revoked orders there was President Biden's really foundational executive order from November of 2023, October of 2023, that set in motion a lot of the federal government's regulatory efforts and the contracting standards that we saw the Biden administration implement. That absolutely fulfilled a campaign promise that President Trump was not shy about making. He said, from the podium multiple times that he would repeal President Biden's executive order on AI, which he regarded as bad for competition and bad for business. A few days later after his inauguration, he signed what is now, we now have the numbers, EO 14179, which is removing barriers to American leadership in artificial intelligence. And so what this substantive executive order on AI does is I think it lets President Trump fulfill the campaign promise that I'm going to revoke the harmful Biden executive order. And then it directs the agencies and the directive goes forward, via OMB to review what was done under the prior administration. And, to along with that review, to suspend, revise, or rescind if inconsistent with whatever the new policy objectives are. So yes, we have the foundational Biden executive order on AI being pulled back. It's gone. And we have a pathway for agencies to continue doing what they were doing under that old executive order. Let's go to the next slide. So the deadlines that they have, that President Trump's executive order specifically spells out, is very tight deadlines. So like in about within 60 days. So March, end of March, we're supposed to see revisions to M2410 and M2418, which are the particular risk management for the government's use of AI and procurement standards for government use of AI, for government procurement of AI. There's carve-outs in M2410 and M2418 for national security, for intelligence, for the IC's use of AI, and there's separate stuff in there about having to revisit that. But our bottom line is that we'll see revised AI safety risk management standards from the federal government and procurement standards by March 24th. Concurrently with that, we have a 180-day deadline. So by the summer, by July 22nd, by my calculation, right, we're supposed to have an action plan for fulfilling President Trump's goals and on AI and we see this in Vice President Vance's remarks in Paris last week, that this is global AI dominance, sustaining and enhancing America's global AI dominance. And so, I think that's, absolutely code worded, or implying that it is a light regulatory touch. Again, harnessing the power of AI, harnessing AI as a tool, and the goals here, promoting human flourishing, economic competitiveness, and national security. So we have this action plan while, revisiting all of the things that Biden did and that were done under the Biden administration and perhaps preserving some of them. Yeah, I think those are the nuts and bolts of the EOs and executive actions and what we're expecting.
Okay, so last week in Paris, Vice President Vance had some pretty harsh words about AI safety. What are you talking to your clients about what that could potentially mean for them?
Right. So the first thing that even under President Biden's executive order, AI safety means different things depending on what the application is and who you're talking to. So that very first Biden executive order and the private agreements that the Biden administration reached with America's biggest AI companies, they're talking about existential risks of AI, the risk that AI is going to be used for nuclear, biological, or to help people create nuclear, biological, or chemical weapons, weapons of mass destruction, or somehow literally will the robots take over and destroy us all? Those are the existential risks, and there's things under the Defense Production Act that President Biden attempted to exercise and entered into agreements with these big tech companies to address. Vice President Harris talked about that at Bletchley Park in 2023 and says, whatever you want to talk about AI safety in that context, there's also AI safety on, hey, does this stuff actually work? And if it doesn't work right, is it going to harm people? And besides physical harms or harms to economic interests, does it have things like dignitary harms or harms to people's privacy or discrimination? All of that is under the aegis of AI safety. Similarly, AI security includes all these concepts like cybersecurity. Is your model safe from being tampered with, from being leaked, from leaking training data, from supply chain risks? Some of these are very traditional cybersecurity risks, and so it's a wide spectrum of risks. And so when the vice president says, well, I don't want to talk about AI safety, I'm here to talk about economic benefits, some of this stuff I think is swept aside. But others, like the cybersecurity risks, or the does this stuff actually work question, that's baked into AI safety, I think that has to continue. That there's government interests in maintaining that testing. Yeah, let's go to the next slide.
Okay, so on the national security side, several weeks ago, a lot of AI people were talking about DeepSeek, and that's a national security conversation that's going on right now, right?
Absolutely. So for those of you who don't know, DeepSeek was a couple of weeks ago, end of January, released. It allegedly reasons better than OpenAI's cutting edge model, GPT-4o, and was trained at a tiny fraction of the cost. It's released by a Chinese company. There's significant questions about ties to China and is the information that you provide to DeepSeek somehow just like other things that are controlled by China and Chinese companies, somehow a security risk. And Congress and the federal government has been super aggressive in saying, yes, this is the line, a 5-alarm national security fire. So there's bills introduced that restrict export import, that impose export import restrictions on AI, not just DeepSeek, but it reaches all of the technology going back and forth. There's bills not well. There's a proposal, a letter from the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party saying, hey, update the FAR to prohibit the government from acquiring stuff that uses DeepSeek or similar PRC models. And so to get to FAR clauses that say, oh, heck no, don't use DeepSeek, don't incorporate DeepSeek or any of these similar models into your product, that is safety and security regulation. So whatever the vice president might say about, oh no, we're not doing this, the cybersecurity imperative and the national security imperative says we're going to do some of this. Let's gum things up further. Let's go to the next slide. Here's our CLE code. Our CLE code is SS0013. SS0013. And we'll say that again. I think there's another slide that's talking about the Attorney General, but it may have gotten deleted in some of the shuffle here. Let's go to the next slide, please. No. Okay, so let me talk quickly about the Attorney General. So we also had on February 5th, Attorney General Bondi issued an internal memorandum to the Department of Justice talking about eliminating internal discriminatory practices, and this was a DEI memo. It was focused on DEI, but I think one of the things that those of us doing DEI and AI bias work have latched onto is that in Bondi's memo, she directs all of the Department of Justice's components to narrow the use of disparate impact theories. And so, as part of the Trump administration's, position on, so-called illegal DEI, we have the Attorney General saying the Department of Justice's position on disparate impact is going to be a lot narrower, and that statistical disparities alone do not automatically constitute unlawful discrimination. And that's quite a different position than say the Department of Labor and OFCCP has taken, and quite a different position than what folks looking at testing AI for unlawful bias, the framing that they've applied. So when we talk about AI safety, when we have this giant umbrella of AI safety, when some people talk about AI safety, including me in the past, it's included the risk of unlawful bias and the harms, especially when we use the Biden administration's framing of rights affecting AI system. We have harms from disparate impact, from unlawful bias, and we see here at the Department of Justice, that they're working towards guidance on statistical disparities, and so I think this absolutely will dovetail in with the discussion about what do we mean by AI safety and what kind of testing is the government going to require for contractors who are selling these systems to the government. Let's go to that last slide and chat about some takeaways here.
Yeah, Rachel. So for our federal contractors who have AI products, what are some of the practical considerations that they should be thinking about?
Thanks. And I think as often when talking about AI, I've gotten slightly ahead of myself. So first, it's the concept of AI safety is broad. And when we hear Vice President Vance say, I'm not here to talk about AI safety. First, we should believe him, and we should anticipate that the Trump administration's position on some AI safety will be backed off on. So the things like the disparate impact testing, and things like hey, the Defense Production Act, and putting the brakes on America's leading tech companies as they look at being competitive with DeepSeek and other people on the global stage. I think that light regulatory touch it is on AI safety. We can expect that. Um, from a practical standpoint, yeah, if you're selling AI, if you're a contractor that's looking at requirements, to the government, that the government is putting out in an RF, yeah, we have contracting officers using M2410 and M2418 to, spell out what do folks have to prove up? What do folks have to demonstrate in response to the federal government's procurement standards on AI? How do you demonstrate that this is safe and secure? And in some cases, that's demonstrating compliance with the NIST AI risk management framework. And in other cases, it's going through M2418, and have you done all these things for rights affecting and safety affecting AI systems? Now, M2418 is going to be revised, but my prediction is this can't go away altogether. It's not. I did have a client say to me, not exactly facetiously, it's like, well, Rachel, Elon Musk is going to stop all of this, right? And I hate to be the lawyer and say it depends, but really, I don't think it all can go away,
Yeah.
because the federal government has, and contracting officers and agencies, especially given the pressures on budget that DOGE and all of, the moment that we find ourselves in, they have pressures to achieve the benefits of AI, but also not to buy junk, not to buy stuff that doesn't work. So the conversations that you'll have in a beauty show, or just in in showing what your product does, how is this safe and secure? The other thing that I feel is really important to think about in terms of China and cybersecurity is that when we talk cybersecurity, we're often talking about state actors like the Chinese army. That we there is that there are state actors, persistent threats, who are trying to hack you, who are trying to hack the federal government, and do all the things that an intruder on the systems would do. And so supply chain vulnerability and cybersecurity concepts on AI security and model vulnerabilities are very important as we look at geopolitical implications of AI and the goals of maintaining American dominance in AI. So that has to be secure. You have to have cybersecurity standards. So when we talk about AI red teaming and adversarial testing, and those are concepts that I think very appropriately got elevated by NIST, by President Biden, by the NIST AI Safety Institute, and we can argue about what AI red teaming actually means. We can argue about what adversarial testing actually constitutes. But the fundamental issue is that if we're looking at this through a competitiveness lens, if we're looking at it through a geopolitical lens, and it's like we have to win against China, then that has to include having a safe and secure and robust AI infrastructure and AI supply chain. So my prediction is that the AI security standards will continue to be very important. Keep a close eye on that. Last parting words. If you're dealing with Doge, all bets are off. I think that, a lot of our experience here in DC is, that, well, here's how things work in regular order. We are not experiencing regular order with what Elon Musk is doing and the Department of Government Efficiency is doing. So if there's an AI system being pointed at that data, all bets are off. M2418, yeah, no, they're not following that. As far as I know, I'd be shocked if they were. But I digress. The other thing is when we talk about unlawful bias and disparate impact, there remain extremely complicated interactions between what the federal government is requiring for its own purchasing requirements, what the federal government through the Department of Justice, the EEOC, and the OFCCP, well, the OFCCP ain't saying anything right now, but what federal law enforcement agencies are saying about disparate impact or not saying anymore, and what a state enforcement agency may say. Now, what the state says about the federal government might not have as much relevance if that's all you care about, but for folks in the private sector broadly worried about state enforcement, those are very complicated interactions. Just because the DOJ may be backing off of these disparate impact theories doesn't mean that the states are or that private litigants are either. And with that, stay tuned. It's going to be a wild ride, not just on AI.
Yeah.
Erica, you want to have the last word?
Yeah, I was just going to say thank you so much for joining us today. I think I know a lot's been going on over the past month, and I really appreciate the summary and the thoughts on what it's going to look like going forward. Love to bring you back in a few months for a further update, but I appreciate your time, and I hope everyone on the webinar has a good day.
Thanks, everyone.